Thanks everyone for being here. Yeah, I guess a minute early from what, but awesome. Welcome everybody. Great to have people here. And we are excited to talk about protecting what we love and investing in sustainable food. So I will just get started then, since we've got a few people in the session. Welcome. This session kind of sprung about when I was talking to one of the organizers of Sea Change about the Jacques Cousteau quote, "People protect what they love." And for a lot of us here at this wonderful conference, it's protecting the outdoors, protecting our winters, and so excited that that Sea Change is partnering with POW on the sessions and protecting your health. So we've got an incredible group of people here today. I will let you guys introduce yourselves, but just very quickly, I'm Elise. I work in impact finance with the Greenbaum Foundation. They're one of the executive producers of films like The Game Changers on Netflix, Cowspiracy and Seaspiracy that just came out yesterday, so please check that out. And co-leading the session with Maria Kuzma, who is a Thule team writer. She's one of the stars of the all-women snowboarding film, Surreal Snowboarding. And Maria, do you want to just, I know your connection's a little rough because you are still filming in Austria, but please introduce yourself. I'm so excited that you're here.
Hi everyone, I'm really excited to be here as well. Welcome everyone, all the speakers that we have today. Our panel are really and I'm really looking forward to this inspiring discussion.
Awesome. We forgive you. And super jealous that you're in St. Anton right now. And it's apparently dumping snow there. So awesome. So we've also got Danya Hakeem, the Director of Innovation, Agriculture and Circular Economy at Elemental Accelerator. Danya, do you want to take a second to introduce yourself? And calling in from Hawaii, so super, super early there. So
yes.
We're really grateful.
Absolutely happy to be here. And if you hear some roosters, we've been competing this morning for talking space. I am calling in from Hawaii. I lead Elemental's agriculture and circular economy portfolios. We're a climate tech accelerator. So we help fund startups that are working to solve climate change. And my background is actually in filmmaking. I used to do documentary filmmaking for National Geographic and Discovery Channel, and then worked in policy advocacy. So is about all the things today.
Awesome, thanks, Danya. We've also got Dr. Frank Cusimano, PhD, who's a nutrition, metabolism, and microbiome scientist and athlete. Hey, Frank.
Hey, thank you, Elise. Yeah, my name's Frank. I am a nutrition scientist, but most of my training has always evolved around the gut microbiome, but more specifically how bacteria in our environment, we can use them either for health, and there's a lot of interesting thing. My background before that was biotechnology. So one of the things that I'm really excited about that's coming up, I think, in the field is the idea that we can engineer bacteria to do specific things in our environment, right? Whether that's breaking down CO2 or utilizing other amino acids that may be throwing off different environmental patterns or things that have to do with like seed blooms and different things. So I think that the bacteria aspect of it and the environment, I think, is really interesting. What I'm up to now, I'm finishing up my medical training, and I will be starting my training in internal medicine in Miami this summer. So thank you, Elise.
Thank you. And I know that we've talked about even just the component of nutrition in medical training. So that's a big conversation and one that we will continue to have. But thanks, Frank. And Amanda K. DeMonaco, hello.
Hi.
You're the founder of Beleaf Retreat.
Hi, Elise. Thank you so much for having me. And yeah, my name is Amanda DeMonaco. I'm founder of Beleaf Retreat, and this is a company I founded during the pandemic to help people transition to a more sustainable, values-based lifestyle via virtual experiences and live immersive events and retreats. Hopefully, post-pandemic, early 2020. Hopefully, let's say next year, 2022, we'll be doing live events. I had been vegetarian or plant-based most of my adult life, but there was, a huge shift that I experienced when news of the pandemic started circulating early 2020. And I began to cultivate, a deep understanding of conscious consumption and the links between the food we eat and the impact of these choices on our health, the animals, and the planet. And, something has just drawn me so deeply to this cause, and I'm hopeful to help others make this connection too.
That's awesome. Thanks for joining us. And I know that you had an amazing retreat, a virtual one recently, and I'd love to hear more. But Jason, welcome, champion triathlete and nutrition podcast creator. Tell us about that.
Thanks, Elise. Yeah, happy to be here today. So I do a lot of what I'm doing right now is actually working with schools. I've created some virtual programs and working with high school students to help them understand, what's happening in the plant-based food space and how that affects different, kids who might be going into the health and wellness sector, or maybe they're, interested in starting up a business, or maybe, there's all these kinds of different opportunities that are being created right now and interesting, things to learn. Young people are coming into a world with a lot of issues, and I feel really passionate about, using plant-based eating as sort of a piece of the puzzle in terms of giving young people some hope to hopefully, have some improvements in terms of the current situation. So that's really what I'm passionate about. And yes, I'm a triathlete as well. I try to race as much as I can and wear clothing that gets people thinking about, where's he getting his protein? And I've had some success at the in terms of racing triathlons. And I also do lots of social media content creation, including podcasts. Started the Vegan Champion podcast, and making lots of videos on YouTube and TikTok and things like that, just to try to get the word out there to some of the younger audiences. And really excited for this discussion today.
No, that's amazing. And I think in addition to the nutrition training in medical schools that we talked about with Frank briefly, I think that having that education early on around food is super, super important. I know at my high school, like our home ec class really didn't go into that. So that's amazing work that you're doing. And Elvira, hello, you are a triathlete, a coach, an author, an entrepreneur, and also Elvira and I had tickets to the Tokyo Summer Games that she organized for an enormous group of us. And unfortunately, they're not letting foreigners into Japan for the Olympics, but we will, hopefully get another chance.
We'll be watching obsessively, rooting for our teams there.
Yep.
So my name is Lara Gonzalez, and I formerly coach at the University of Pennsylvania. I also coached an Olympic athlete in London in 2017, and then I worked at the Armory in New York City. It's kind of like the mecca of indoor track and field. And now I run an online program called Writers Inkubator. We help cultivate book ideas, and we're looking for very diverse stories, specifically sustainable and vegan stories. I'm also working on a book that's being auctioned between two publishers at the moment, and that is also being turned into a feature film that's been in the works for about 2 years. And I'm also a triathlete, as Elise mentioned, and I just qualify also for the 2021 USA Nationals, so it'll be my first national debut in August.
Incredible. Well, thanks guys for being here. And Maria, if your connection's okay, I'd love to start with you about why it is that you care about food when you think about protecting the outdoors and protecting your health, and what your journey's been to your food choices.
Thank you, Elise. Yes, I mean, I feel like when that question is such an overarching question, it's a good one, because when you think about it in general, everything is connected. Of course, when I've been snowboarding since I was 10 years old, and then I made the jump to go from vegetarian. When I did, I just found that I had a lot more energy. And then, you know, as snowboarders, I'm also an architect, and I'm also there's always a link there too between my architecture and my snowboarding and how I'm eating. And it's like, you know, my main snowboard sponsor supported me to go over to Brazil and do an architecture project. And architecture build the school by a vegan superfood company. And the whole idea behind the architecture project is based on low maintenance wastewater garden systems, which are basically landscaped around the building to make a really strong connection between the school children and the plants. And this is all funded by like a vegan superfood company. So I feel like veganism and nature and how, I mean, there's just that special connection with snowboarders and nature in general. You know, it's just, it's all connected.
Yeah, we can actually hear you.
I went
Sometimes
on a bit
the
of a
image is a
ramble.
little
Is
slow,
my
but we
Wi-Fi
can,
connection
yeah,
okay for
I'm
now?
happy.
Oh, yay, cool. Oh, great. That's great. Yeah, so, I mean, you know, I live where we're staying at the moment. It's a village in Austria. It's very, you know, people think, oh, how could you be vegan? Do you have enough energy? Because our valley is very dairy focused. But to be honest, it's more affordable, and I feel like I have more energy and to be out there in nature and doing what I need to do. And to me, that question is just something that's it's
thanks
so
for
simple,
sharing
you
that.
know?
That's great. And I think that
Yeah,
there are also some, I mean, also just really excited to see your movie and all women shredding. One, super jealous of everyone that's out in the snow in Austria right now. But you're just an amazing voice for sustainability and for women's empowerment within the winter sports industry. So thanks for doing that and for being you. But I'd love to hear what, you know, brought everyone else to caring about food and protecting the outdoors and protecting their health, and what it is that you all are excited about in the space, and just anybody feel free to start.
Yeah, I'd love to jump in.
Sure.
Yeah, so I think, you know, with plant-based meats and cultivated meats and fermentation, we can really do so much to, you know, mitigate the environmental impact of our food system and really help, you know, decrease the risk of these zoonotic diseases and ultimately feed more people with fewer resources. So I feel super strongly that we need to, you know, really normalize compassion and get on board with taking animals out of our supply chain. You know, as you know, we're in the midst of a global pandemic, and with that has come social separation and COVID deaths and job loss. And we're also facing, you know, climate change, as everyone knows, and species extinction and biodiversity loss, and the decimation of our forests and rivers and oceans, and a myriad of diseases and health issues. And that's not even mentioning the horrific treatment and abuse of our animals. And so all these things are just, you know, inherently linked to animal agriculture, and our health is inextricably tied to the planet.
Thanks, Amanda.
Yeah.
And when it comes to, oh, Danya, you unmuted. Go ahead.
Yeah, I can pop in. A friend of mine shared with me recently a fun quote. He said, my grandfather used to say that one a doctor, a lawyer, a policeman, and a preacher, hopefully, but every day, 3 times a day, you need a farmer. And I think the food system is such a connector in that way. It's something that people interact with, you make these choices every day in terms of what you put in your body. It's a way to engage in environmentalism. It's a gateway drug, let's say, to environmentalism. And so that's one of the things that I really appreciate it, and I think allows people to really get involved and make choices with the money that they have. So that's what brought me to it in a lot of ways. I wanted to inspire people to care about the planet, and I started with food. What else is exciting me right now? So I work in sort of the investment in ag tech and Indigo. I saw your question. There's lots of innovative companies in this space. One, I just wanted to share that investment in innovative food startups has doubled this past year to 2.3 billion. That's really driven by a lot of the alt protein startups that you're just hearing about, and also just an increase in consumer consciousness about their food and food security. With COVID, it just was like all of a sudden, especially in Hawaii where I am, food insecurity is just so present when we have a week's worth of food if the barges don't come. And so people just started to think about, oh my gosh, how do I get food? Can I source from my local farmers? And we have some amazing startups that are helping to facilitate that. And then there's been this resurgence of, or a lot of like incredible commitments as well, and a resurgence of interest in the connection between agriculture and climate change. And regenerative agriculture is a word that gets thrown out a lot. I'm sure you guys, sounds like you've heard a lot about it in the sessions. It's really, if people aren't familiar, it's a way of mimicking how life has managed soils and biomass for billions of years. It's just a different strategies to manage for healthy soils. But also in doing so, you're balancing the water cycle, improving water quality, avoiding erosion, biodiversity, all the good things. There's been a lot of interest in regen ag. There's been a lot of big corporates making commitments around it. So Danone, General Mills, Kellogg, Nestle, Mars, Unilever. It's really exciting to see that as well. And then there's some incredible entrepreneurs building companies to support that as well. So happy to share more about that. But I'll pass it to someone else to share what they're excited about first.
Oh yeah, hey, sorry, I had an issue unmuting. Yeah, Jason, do you want to go? And maybe I'll just quickly, I love what Danya shared about how you need a farmer, and completely agree. And one of the things that I'm also excited about in regards to your comments is some of the groups that are trying to, I guess, make farming sexy again. And like there are some groups in the Philippines that we've supported that are encouraging kids to explore farming. Like they have like these mini farms in schools, and this is also a way for them to come out of food insecurity, is for the entire community to get involved with this and how to grow their own food. And what you also mentioned about food insecurity in some parts of Hawaii, I think that that's been a major area of interest, and certainly one when we look at ways to invest in food is just those and Hawaii, of course, would suffer from this, but those supply chain disruptions that were caused by and again, I'll mention the Philippines, and I'm also just, Maria and I together make one Filipina. She's half as well, so I wanted to mention that. But it's a country of over 7,000 islands. And so the supply chain issues during their very strict lockdown were just atrocious for food security in an already food insecure country. So being able to manage that and being able to encourage communities to get into farming and to learn about ways that they can get more in touch with the land and the soil is just something that I'm just super excited about. And I'm excited to hear that you've seen a resurgence of interest in the sector. And when it comes to the soil, of course, also mention the Philippines just because I know it so well. But the monocropping is something that clearly, we have to confront and make sure that we manage soil so that we can continue to have harvests. But sorry, Jason, that was like a long-winded yes to what Danya was mentioning. But
no, it's all good.
Please share.
I'm really excited about just seeing some of the responses I've had working with young people when they hear the information around, plant-based eating and the potential it has that, to have the kind of positive changes. I'm really excited by that interest that I'm seeing from young people, and just in general, I went plant-based, went vegan back in 2009, and it's been like just comparing now and then with the options that are available, what's going on in terms of innovation. Like, it's just really, really exciting in general to see. And I think that when, bringing up this, regenerative agriculture, it's something that I'm learning about. And, I think sometimes it can be a little confusing for people, because when we hear regenerative agriculture, I think it's fair to say we're not only talking about, like creating, good meat, I think was mentioned in the comments, right? I think it's also just looking at how we're growing plants. And I think that the sort of thing that I like to clarify when we have these conversations around regenerative agriculture is that, this is, and this is not my area of expertise, and there's other people who might know more, but when it comes to looking at solutions from an environmental perspective, like 10,000 years ago, it was 99% of the biomass on the planet was wild animals, and today it's less than 2%. Humans and the animals we're growing for food make up 98% of the biomass right now. So if we're talking about changing our food system to be more sustainable, more environmentally friendly, we do need to be looking at reducing the amount of meat that we're consuming. At the very least, we can't just make a switch to regenerative meat, good meat, and just keep eating the same amount of meat and animal products that we're eating. So when we talk about regenerative agriculture, that's the way I think about it is, it's important for us not to think that we can just switch, eating bacon 3 times a day and just switch that to be coming from regenerative agriculture. There would still be all kinds of health issues and environmental issues and just issues with that. So I think that that's the one point I would throw out there in terms of regenerative. But it is definitely exciting to just see in general farmers looking to more sustainable solutions and getting away from the sort of monocultures.
Thanks, Jason. That's super helpful. And since you mentioned eating bacon 3 times a day, maybe we could go to either Elvira or Frank. They might have something to say about the health effects and nutrition and what we should be thinking about when we're looking at how we can be sure that we're up there, shredding till we're 90 or more, maybe. Hey, Frank.
Absolutely, Elise. I would love to jump in. I think the conversation having is really interesting, especially when you talk about bacon and processed foods. I think that there's definitely a skew, or when you look at the general public about what their opinions are of nutrition, you have some that are very evidence-based, and then you have some that are very, I would say, not necessarily evidence-based, but they're more convinced that the science is showing one thing when maybe it's showing another. But I want to talk about an area that I think is even more interesting, and not just the implications of what you put on your plate 3 times a day and how it affects your long-term health, because I think that is a really interesting topic, and I think that's crucial. I mean, that's like my area of expertise, but I think the area that most of us miss when we think about the question of how do we save our winters, or how do we think about how the health of the U.S. or of the world, how it affects human health. And that's an area that I think a lot of people forget the disconnect of really what happens in the environment and how it affects our health. For example, if we think about climate change, it only takes 2 degrees Celsius on either direction to completely wipe out what's habitable for us, right? If we think 2 degrees colder on average of the world temperature, just 2 degrees colder, we are actually back to our last ice age. If we think 2 degrees hotter, it would be at the hottest time recorded in the world history, right? And so that huge skew of just small degrees really does change the impacts of the environment and how that affects human health. For example, in this past January, I was in Austin, Texas, and I was treating patients, and I was working at one of the hospitals there. And we had obviously a snowstorm, and it got freezing for a few weeks. And you may think, oh, well, it's Texas, people will learn, they'll adapt, they'll be fine. But we were seeing countless a number of individuals come into the ER with hypothermia because they didn't have the proper ways to prevent themselves from being too cold. and that affects human health, drastically. Not to mention just like the changes in pollution that changes as the atmosphere starts to change. So I think the relation to human health, and as the climate or as the temperature changes on a global scale, we really are going to see different health outcomes. In 40 years, if we don't course correct, we're going to see different health outcomes then that we may not see that we're seeing today. And that's going to be something that I think is really interesting. And only now scientists and physicians are starting to predict where that's going to be so that we can make sure we're ready to take care of those patients with those specific health problems that we may not be capable of taking care of right now, or we may not have the resources set up to take care of that volume of patients coming in with those health issues.
Thanks. And just, on the subject of what you were discussing for temperature, but also in terms of nutrition education around, diabetes, around like the obesity epidemic that we've been experiencing, the way in which consumption of certain products can lead to comorbidities that would make entire populations more vulnerable. Is there anything that you'd like to add there?
Yeah, I think
and then we'll go to Elvira.
On the education front, I mean, when we think about where our experts are learning about nutrition, we have a huge skew, right? It's not like a traditional field where everyone who does, let's say, invest, which the top investment bankers are, they kind of know where their training is. They all kind of follow the same path to get there. Whereas in nutrition, you have so many different peoples and kind of different cooks in the kitchen, right? You have physicians who think they know a lot about nutrition. You have nutritionists who have learned about nutrition a lot of times on their own. You have registered dietitians who become experts in it, and that's what they treat patients with. And then you have, anywhere from nurses to, personal trainers who all have education in physiology and human anatomy and may know a fair about nutrition, but the education they're receiving is all very different. And I think until we can get to an equal playing field of everyone starting to realize what is accurate from a scientific standpoint and on a longitudinal standpoint, I think until we get there, we're going to see these discrepancies and kind of almost like these diet wars or these food wars or these opinion wars on what's healthy and what isn't, for short term or long term or for disease reversal.
Thanks. Elvira, I know you are just an incredible athlete and you've had an interesting journey around food, but I'd also like to, there's some great questions coming in from the audience. So I'd love to bring people up, and maybe we'll start bringing people up. But Elvira, could you talk to us a bit about why you're so excited about food?
Yes, well, really quickly, I'm actually from Texas, Frank, and my family was directly impacted by the temperature, and I'm from Laredo, Texas, which is one of the warmest cities in the U.S. It's, it's 90 degrees all year long, sometimes it's 120. So I'm used to the warm weather. So for them, when this happened, they were really scrambling for, shelter and trying to stay warm for a couple of days when they lost power. So I think for me, my everyday choices are impacted by those events, right? So including products, things that I buy, not only food. I've been vegan for about 5 years, and that only happened because I was living in London coaching this Olympic athlete. And at the time I was developing asthma, and I'm thinking, wait, I'm a former elite athlete. I'm a coach. How can I be, how can I have asthma as an adult? So I lived in Texas, so the air is not as bad as London or New York, but I thought that maybe it could be, the air. So I started thinking more about food, and not only food for the planet, but also for my athlete who's constantly injured, and thinking about, why does this athlete, his injuries were prolonged for, more than normal. So I started learning about veganism, specifically a plant-based diet, and we both kind of transitioned, and I saw the difference in my asthma, but also in his performance. And I'm thinking, this whole time I've been thinking about more of the training as opposed to the recovery. And I think a lot of coaches are focused on the training, but they're both equally important, right? And what are these athletes doing to their bodies when they're not training? And at the 2016 Olympics, I was at the Olympic Village with one of my friends, and I saw that McDonald's had a location within the Olympic Village, and all these athletes were lined up getting McDonald's. And I'm thinking, you guys are about to compete, or maybe they competed before. but I'm just thinking like, how is this possible? And, what are these coaches, what are they coaching their athletes? So I guess for me now, my everyday, I think about food and things that I buy because of carbon emissions and the air pollution, but also how do I reduce agriculture. Like I said, I've been vegan for 5 years, so I don't eat any meat, but there is an online vegan calculator that helps you calculate how much carbon emissions you save. So I think people ask me like, well, what am I doing if I eat vegan for a day or sustainable foods? But the numbers are there. And I think if you learn about the numbers, that's all you need to do, because all you need to know, because if one person can save 20 pounds of carbon emissions per day times 365 days, what is that on a big scale, right? With 5% of the planet, that's a big difference. So we can all agree if we want this planet, we have to think twice about our decision making on food, but also products. And that is it. Yeah.
Thank you. We've maybe lost Maria due to her connection. Hopefully she'll pop back in. But yeah, if anybody, I think that in order to come up, you guys need to kind of raise your hands. I tried to bring the last person up. I don't think it worked, but feel free to come chat. And otherwise, if you guys want to, yeah, thanks, Cassidy. You share audio and video in the top right corner to request to come up, and then we can bring you up. But is there anything in particular in terms of new developments that you guys are seeing that you're excited about? Like, I had listened in on some of the sessions that were going on beforehand, and they were talking about sustainable materials, which is a really cool field, and there's a lot being done there and a lot of shifts being made in not only the fashion sector, but in automotive and home goods. And they were talking about mushroom leather, so textiles being made from mycelium and just everything mycelium. I'm super excited. Really cool fermentation technology that's being employed to kind of bring about like meat analogs with mushrooms. But also I just and Danya and anybody else that would love to, that has any knowledge of that, seaweed products that are coming out. What are you guys seeing that you're psyched about?
Yeah, I can pop in. So yes, agreed. I think the mycelium thing, I mean, people are starting to see that our soils are alive and recognize that, and then cultivate mushrooms and mycelium and use fermentation methods to create new things. So I'm really excited about that too. I think just to speak to our regenerative agriculture portfolio, so we funded 120 companies to date at Elemental Accelerator, and have an amazing portfolio of regenerative ag companies in the mix. So I can speak to a couple of those to get people excited about what's happening in that world. There's a few tree crop companies that I'm really excited about. I'll speak to one. It's called Propagate Ventures. So there's a term called agroforestry, if folks have heard of it. Sounds like we have some experts in the audience too, but it's just an integration of tree crops and row crops. And also silvopasture, two, when you look at Project Drawdown, 2 of the like top 10 solutions to climate change, silvopasture and agroforestry. And this is a digital solution that helps to plot out what it would look like, what the labor costs would be, what the timeline would be for production, and then also to fundraise for it. So excited about companies like Propagate Ventures and others in our portfolio, Terra Viva and Hawaii Ulu Co-op, that are growing starches and protein on trees, so we don't have to be tilling our soil as frequently, and we don't have to use as many really intensive inputs. We also have a portfolio company called Planet Forward. That's amazing. A really cool company. The intention is to really pull forward regenerative agriculture practices into the ingredients of larger brands' food. So they're the supply chain connector for brands that want to be more climate friendly. They help do an initial assessment for a brand, but then from there, help them think about how they diversify their ingredients to be more regenerative, because that's what we need. We need more farmers growing this way. We also have a really cool company, last one I'll share, around virtual fencing. So I know there's lots of chat around animal agriculture and livestock and the integration there of like how much, we obviously need to cut down, but is there a role for animal agriculture? I think there is, when grown when raised the right way. And so we have a couple companies that are looking at livestock management, virtual fencing, grazing management. One is called Vents, and another Pasture Map. So really helping farmers be super thoughtful about how they raise their animals so that they can support soil health and reduce any of the negative externalities of ag. So just a few I'm excited about, but there's so much going on in this world of startups and innovators that are seeing the problems that you and I and all of us are seeing and are stepping up to try to solve them.
That's awesome. And one thing that I had mentioned before too, I don't know if you guys are seeing anything around seaweed, but I've just begun to see kind of a proliferation of companies that are doing, whether it's micronutrients, or I know that they're just an amazing, they're just an amazing tool when it comes to fighting climate change. And Amanda, I don't know if you have anything to say I know that Laird Superfoods is, I think they have, I don't remember what it's called, Aquaman, or basically some derivative of seaweed. And maybe you or anyone else has information about that, but that's one thing that I'd love to learn a lot more about, is the way in which we can kind of encourage the growth of certain types of seaweed.
Yeah, I don't know too much about what Laird Superfoods is doing, but I have been following that space closely and just so fascinated by what's happening in the fashion industry. What you just mentioned with mushroom leather. Stella McCartney just launched her whole mushroom leather line of clothing, which is just so cool.
Yeah, they were talking about that in the earlier session about like it's an entirely mushroom derived outfit.
Yeah, it's amazing. And also Hermes just launched a mycelium purse. So it's really cool that fashion's going in that direction too. And all the innovations with cactus leather and fruit leathers and, apple skins and banana peels. I mean, it's crazy what they're figuring out now. So it's really exciting.
Great stuff.
Hey, Elise, I was just going to add, I think it's real. So when I was doing my doctoral work, my PhD, we were working with we had a DARPA grant that was working on using fungi as construction and building materials. So I think we often think about a lot of this in the form of textiles and in food, but there's still so much that has to do with the environment when we talk about construction, especially for short-term construction properties. Like, for example, when a military base gets moved over to another country, they build up their whole military base with materials that they ship over there. And then when they leave, it's either do they leave the stuff there or do they bring it back? Or there's a lot of waste and a lot of management of materials in that way. But there's a company and a few grants that I know that are being worked on right now to have creative ways to use mycelium and fungus as forms of building construction materials that would grow on their own after you get the starting blocks. And that was one of the projects that some people in my lab were working on, which I think is just so huge to be able to do things that can withstand the harshness of different environments, but also that has a very low carbon footprint, that doesn't require a lot of transportation, and then can also be worked into the environment after a structure or after a temporary housing unit is done being used, because it literally is from fungus or it's from plant materials already that can then grow into the local environment. So I think that's an area that hopefully we see more in the next 5 years or so.
Yeah, it makes me think, I think that really interesting crossover between crops that can be used for food, but that are also used for materials is really interesting, because it just, when it comes to like the value of that supply chain, I think that's fascinating, and making sure when it comes to waste that we're utilizing every part of the plant. So we've got the mycelium, And another material or crop that comes to mind is hemp. I don't know if any of you guys have anything to add when it comes to hemp, which of course, we know can be consumed, but is also applicable to the kind of green construction industry. I know that there's a lot being done there, but if anybody has any knowledge or has seen anything interesting around that, definitely chime in. And totally feel free to come up and join us in the chat, you guys. Don't be afraid. I'm bummed that Maria can't come back, but for sure. Oh, hello, David. Join us. Hi.
Hi, how you doing?
Great.
Hey,
Good
Dave.
to see you.
Yeah, nice to see you too. Thanks for letting me up. I don't want to interrupt the flow of the conversation here, but when there's a break, I'd love to ask a question.
Yeah, no, we were just I just brought up hemp, and if anybody wants to add to that, please do. But yeah, otherwise feel free to chime in.
Nobody gonna respond on the hemp front?
That was Emma. She's psyched about hemp too, but you go ahead, David.
All right, I'll ask my question. It's not hemp specific related, but I come from the impact investing lens, and I work with individuals who want to have varying intended impacts that they'd like to have and causes they care about. Environment's a big one for a lot of people. Obviously, the food system is an integral part of that. I'm curious from each of your perspectives, like what would you see as if an investor came to you and say, like, what are the most impactful investments I could make for related to your kind of industries and your specific areas of focus that would move the needle most, and like what's most needed right now? How could I be most impactful with each investment dollar?
I mean, I'll chime in. I think one thing, David, like just seeing the effect that documentaries have. I don't know if investing in documentary films, like in helping to create that kind of awareness. I feel like that can be really powerful. Like just seeing what has happened with the Game Changers documentary. I know a lot of us in here were athletes. Looking at how that just totally flipped the switch for a lot of people and really opened up that possibility. I don't, that might not be what the answer you were expecting, but when it comes to shifting the needle and just changing the conversation, I think that, yeah, creating these kinds of, different kinds of educational content, or, just inspirational, videos and things like that. I think those can really go.
That was great, Jason. Danya, what do you think?
Yeah. I mean, it's a nuanced question because it sort of depends on their risk comfortability and how impact oriented they are. In terms of investment, there's a lot of money going into alt protein, as I mentioned earlier. But if they want to, they want to be really impactful for a company that's, maybe less well funded at the moment. There's a lot happening in regenerative ag, as I shared earlier, and I think that's an area where there's a lot of things we need to figure out, particularly on the soil health measurement and verification side of it, and the carbon offsets. But there's some really cool companies trying to solve for that. Nori's one that I admire. I don't know if you've connected with them, but they're sort of a platform connector. And then there's quite a few that are trying to solve for the actual soil health, the soil health amendments with the soil health measurement side of it. That's where I'm really excited to see growth. And I think with some increased capital and support, those companies could really get over that hurdle, and we could unlock the potential for regenerative ag. Happy to put a couple in the chat if helpful.
Sure, yeah.
I'm firing off all these links here of companies for people to check out.
Does anyone else want to add to that?
Yeah, Elise, I can jump in. David, that's a great question. And I think from being both on the medical side, but also on the nutrition science and the research side, I think one thing that there's failed to have enough funding for is nutrition research that looks more like cross-population and isn't necessarily looking at one specific endpoint. I think some of at least from an NIH or a National Science Foundation, there's not enough funding that goes into nutrition research, especially the questions that don't necessarily have good backers, right? There's not big industries that want to fund research on the difference between different type of milks or different types of dairy products. Or obviously the milk industry is very heavily invested in trying to promote their products, but the research on an unbiased front, there's not good funding for those type of research projects. So hopefully in the future, I hope that there's more nutrition research funding that is less biased and less industry funded, but is more funded by like things like the NIH or things like DARPA or organizations that have less vested interest into the profitability of a specific area, but more in the interest of what's going to be the best for human health and long-term health outcomes of a general population.
Thank you so much. They're really great answers.
Thanks, and great question, David. Appreciate it. I think that Christopher Carlton had tried to come up. I think I added him, but there, he's in the chat. But I think that it's a really interesting question around like where is there neglect in funding, and I don't know if the others have thoughts on this, but when you think of how much the American government spend each year, which is near 40 billion apparently to subsidize meat and dairy, but a very tiny percent of that, apparently less than 1%, goes to subsidizing fruit and vegetables. I would say that things like alt proteins are not overfunded, that it's not, you know, an industry where you know, we have nearly enough support. So I don't know if the others have thoughts on that. And definitely when it comes to funding for unbiased nutrition research, that's something that I wholeheartedly agree with you on. And when it comes to things like even just managing our healthcare system, and again, coming back to investing in protecting what we love, in order to continue participating in the things that make, you know, that make us happy, we have to be healthy. And a lot of disease can be avoided and sometimes reversed through nutrition. So I think that when it comes to even a country's spending on healthcare, a lot of that needs to be allocated to preventive health, and a lot of that has to do with nutrition. So I don't know if I'm breaking up right now. I think I'm frozen, but maybe that fixed it.
No, you're good.
Okay, cool. Hey.
Speaking of which, there is that startup that I mentioned to you a few weeks ago called Propagate Ventures. I think you know the co-founder, one of the co-founders, and I guess that's an alternative protein startup in Asia, right? And they're looking for investors. So that's one company, David. But I think there's a bigger market in Asia, and there's the
Sorry, Elvira?
Propagate Ventures is the name of the company, and there's a much bigger market over there and higher impact, you know, if they create winners. But for the most part, they don't have the corn subsidy, so a plant-based protein alternative can be, you know, priced much earlier. I think Elise can speak on that, and she that startup, and that's her expertise. Elise, Asia, is that correct?
Yeah, I'm not sure about that startup in particular. I think you had sent it to me, and I definitely would love to dig in. But I know that just at least in Asia, when it comes to animal agriculture, they do consider it a national security risk. Half their head of swine had to be culled due to African swine flu, and this is something that, you know, whether it's a factory farm or a small farm, these are diseases that originate in animal agriculture. So it's something that should be considered. And I know the you know, when it comes, of course, to water usage, something that a lot of countries are concerned about. And we think of Singapore as an example of a country that is spending a decent amount on research into food security, because the vast majority of their food does come from other countries. So that makes them very vulnerable, and just something that that I think is sometimes overlooked. But nonetheless, I think that what Danya had brought up about the importance of soil, and of course we don't want monocrops, and it's something that you know, we do need to protect our farmlands, and governments should play a role in building policy around that. And I don't think that they play enough of a role in helping to guide that. So yeah. And thanks for bringing that up, Elvira. I'll definitely take another look at it. But but yeah, no, I think that there's just so much knowledge here in this panel, and we're all learning from one another. So I'm just appreciative of all of you spending your time here. Unless there are other questions, we could maybe start to wrap up. But David, I'm so happy that you came up to chat. And Maria, do you have any thoughts you'd like to share as well?
So many, and internet's out, and I've been listening to so many people. There was the first internet went out as people started talking about regeneration, and I just wanted to add way back, but in the world that we're living right now, based on be done regeneration, in my mind, that's a lot more organic and a slower. So it's like, how do we have systems and products, and I feel like the shift is also a shift regarding that that lack of the addiction to something that's really direct. I mean, there was someone that started talking about environment, which is true. I think Germany alone, like the of waste alone comes from their construction industry. And then I can tie that back to agriculture and how there is just so many waste streams in agriculture, in ag, that can be tapped into and really utilized and even commodified into alternative building materials. You know, there's a lot of waste coming out of, and the more we turn to more vegan lifestyles and food systems, the more agricultural waste we will get, and which means the more potential to tap into alternative, more sustainable, less toxic construction.
That's great. And everyone definitely check out Maria's new film. When is it released, Maria? Oh, I don't think we can hear you. You're muted. But maybe you could put it in the chat as well.
Yes, I'll do that.
Amazing. And yeah, I would just like to thank just all of you for being here. And if you guys have any parting thoughts, definitely unmute and share. But I just encourage everyone here to keep in touch with the panelists. They're amazing. And Christopher also, who was unable to, but has been adding to the chat, has put in his email address. He's with the World Resources Institute and doing some great work, God, in so many different areas. So definitely keep in touch with him as well if you have questions. And yeah, do you guys want to add anything? Otherwise, I'll just kind of wrap up, and we can go check out what the other sessions are up to. And there's some great people speaking the rest of the day.
I mean, there's one question. Danielle asked, "What are some stories missing in the media that could help move the dial?" And you know, one thing that just as we've been going through this whole pandemic thing, I just have to throw this out there to people. Like, I just am mind blown that, like, how are we not talking about preventing future pandemics? How is that getting left out of the conversation? How are we not talking about the fact that these zoonotic diseases are coming out of places where animals are being exploited, and we need to address that? I don't understand.
Thank you.
I understand that there's a lot of people with seats at the table, and there's a lot of industry and people's livelihoods are at stake, and it really challenges the status quo. But man, I really wish that there'd be more coverage of that. How are we going to prevent future pandemics from happening? Zoonotic diseases, where is the conversation around that? So I'll throw that out there. But yeah, being curious to hear what I've.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like the pandemic conversation is really left out, and that people aren't making that connection. So yes, I totally agree there. And yeah, just some final words, you know, for everyone. You know, if you love the outdoors, you love the planet, you love animals, you know, really make sure you're aligning your values with, you know, how you want to live your life. You know, all these little things count. You know, reducing your food waste and your plastic in your homes. You know, eating less meat or no meat. cutting dairy, you know, start simple. You know, learn all you can about what's really going on behind the scenes about these issues, climate change and pandemics, as we just said, and, you know, consider using your own social media networks to share information about causes that mean something to you. Join groups and share your mission, donate, support mission-driven businesses.